The COVID-19 pandemic can easily be considered one of the greatest health crises of modern times, and beyond the threat to our well-being, it has also sparked a huge polarization between two factions at a worldwide scale. But no matter what you think or how you react to this situation, I'm sure we all want to know who are ultimately responsible. And when people ponder about this, the name of Dr. Anthony Fauci usually pops up. You might wonder, how come a single person has attracted so much attention in regards to his responsibility on this crisis? And the answer is related to the scientific term gain-of-function research, a topic that was somewhat obscure outside epidemiology circles until a few months ago. To analyze Fauci's exchanges, we will dissect this term and its relationship with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the theories of the original outbreak of this pandemic, and all the statements that just don't fit. I strongly encourage you to watch this video with an open mind and armed with your common sense. I'm not here to attack anyone, but to understand why sometimes it's so difficult to trust so many figures who claim to be invested in our well-being. US Senator Rand Paul has had quite a few heated exchanges with Fauci where they argue about the possibility that the SARS-CoV-2 virus was man-made inside a lab and was not a natural mutation that occurred on the wild. Just to be clear about the terms, SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus itself and COVID-19 is the name of the disease associated to it. So Senator Paul was pushing him to be clear about any gain-of-function research done at the Wuhan Institute that could lead to the artificial creation of SARS-CoV-2, which Fauci vehemently denied. Why is this statement so critical? Because in 2014, the US-based organization EcoHealth Alliance was awarded a grant to look into possible coronaviruses from bats.
The proposal requests $3.1 million for a project titled Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus Emergence. Well, we know the answer to that question now. It's a considerable risk.
$600,000 of which was awarded to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to be spent over 5 years. There are some documents that claim this amount was higher, but for our purposes, we can be good with the $600K amount. Dr. Fauci has been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, at the NIH since 1984, so he is the main actor in supervising these grants. He already stated in the Senate hearing that yes, the Wuhan lab in China was given this amount. This is important. He does not deny the financing of the Wuhan lab to do bad coronavirus studies. What he denies is that there was no gain-of-function research. But again, what exactly is gain-of-function? And this is why it's so important to define what is the term that Fauci is outright denying. In simple terms, gain-of-functions is altering an organism so that it acquires abilities or characteristics that it doesn't originally have, aims to add abilities like being more contagious or being more lethal or breaking the zoonotic barrier between species.
Trying to make the viruses more dangerous and or infectious. Like, that kind of experimentation you would only want in the hands of people that are operating.
For example, the avian H5N1 influenza virus can be transmitted from birds to humans, but there's no human-to-human transmission, yet. And that bastard has a 60% fatality rate. In 2011, Yoshihiro Kawaoka and Ron Fouchier revealed that they carried a gain-of-function experiment and managed to modify this virus so that it spread by air between ferrets, between mammals, just like us. Such gain-of-function studies claim that they can help public health experts better understand how viruses might spread so we can plan and prepare for pandemics. But by enabling the bird virus, for example, to spread among mammals by air, this kind of experiments also raise fears that it could jump to humans. And critics of the work have been worried for years that such a used virus could spark a pandemic if it escaped from a lab or was intentionally released by a bioterrorist. Again, baby cages. Now you're beginning to see the whole picture. If it's proven that SARS-CoV-2 originated at the Wuhan lab thanks to gain-of-function research on bad coronaviruses financed by the US government, well, guess who's the first name that will pop up in the most wanted list? The Chinese government has denied that SARS-CoV-2 was at any time present at the Wuhan lab, But again, we have to remember that in the early 2000s, Chinese government officials suppressed crucial public health data of the SARS epidemic. And the same happened at the start of the Covid-19 pandemic. So it's no wonder that we just cannot trust them. Especially because they haven't allowed a deep international investigation of Wuhan lab records. The official narrative is that SARS-CoV-2 originated in the Huanan seafood market, that is a 40-minute drive from the Wuhan lab, and they say that proximity is the reason why people think it was a lab leak. What a coincidence. So that official narrative implies that a bad coronavirus mutated, found an intermediate animal host, and then jumped to humans when it became their lunch, right? That could be possible, but there's a problem with that.
Two big pieces of information. Number one, the wet markets where they sell these exotic animals in Wuhan and in parts of China, they tested 80,000 animals, and they didn't find any animals that were positive for COVID. So they didn't find an animal host for this. It looks like it just showed up one day in humans. That argues for this coming from a lab and not evolving and coming from animals. The other large piece of evidence is they looked at thousands of blood samples from people in China in 2019 to see if any of them had antibodies to COVID already. If this came naturally, usually it comes slowly before it comes quickly, and you'll find in the very early stages some sporadic cases of people who had COVID in 2019. Well, they looked through, I believe, 9,000 samples, and they found nobody with COVID.
Tonight, NBC News confirms a US intelligence report says 3 researchers at a Wuhan lab fell ill and even went to the hospital right before the coronavirus pandemic began.
Back in 2003, with the original SARS, scientists discovered that civets were the intermediate animals that allow SARS-CoV-1 to jump from bats to humans. Do you know how long did it take them to discover it almost 20 years ago? 42 days. Today, in 2021, we are more than 1.5 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you know how many animals or species have been identified as a link between bats and humans? 0. In fact, SARS-CoV-2 has not been found in any bat colony after all this time. There's no trace of it in the wild or any virus that could be its ancestor. So the Chinese government claims that it originated spontaneously in nature, but no one has yet found any evidence of any kind of any animal carrying it. That's why the lab leak theory has gained traction, the gain of function topic has exploded, and Fauci has been called on it more than once. Well, this is your last chance to grab popcorn because you won't believe what Fauci said 9 years ago. In December 2012, the NIH hosted a very interesting workshop in which the main topic was gain-of-function research on H5N1 viruses, the 60% fatality bastard. Of course, you already know who was the main attraction of the event. Listen to this.
As part of that influenza basic research was intensive study of host adaptation, transmissibility of influenza viruses, pathogenesis, and virulence. And integral to that study has always been the issue of gain-of-function research, not only for influenza, but essentially for all infectious diseases research.
So, according to his words, gain-of-function research is integral to the study of not only influenza, but any infectious disease. He's just mentioning it, right? But no, he wants to be absolutely clear about what he means and even give some ideas about it.
Does this mutation make something more transmissible, more pathogenic, or adapt to host better? Or, what historically investigators have done is to actually create gain of function by making mutations, passage adaptation, or other newer genetic techniques such as reverse genetics and genetic reassortment.
So basically, you want to create a super virus that spreads, infects, and kills faster than anything known to man. That could be the script of a Roland Emmerich movie. And he means business.
But the bottom line is that gain and loss of function research is critical to understanding disease pathogenesis, antimicrobial resistance, and host responses, as well as to developing better techniques of surveillance, vaccines, and therapeutics, specifically to gain-of-function research on HPAI H5N1.
specifically the gain-of-function research on H5N1. He was outright pushing to put the 60% fatality bastard on steroids. But now he's going full multi-level marketing on this.
Now, just to put in perspective, are we talking about a major chunk of what we do? No. As a matter of fact, this is relatively small. It's part of 4 flu research projects that contain this. It's around 10% of the entire H5N1 portfolio and less than 1% of the total NIAID flu research funding.
These are the kind of arguments that should set off your natural alarms. First you tell me that this gain-of-function research is really critical, right? And now you tell me that it's no big deal in terms of budget, that it's almost cheap. Yeah, let's make this virus mutations wholesale. But then I understood why Fauci was so hell-bent on pushing this agenda, so to speak.
There was an explosion of reaction, sometimes bordering on the very extreme, as shown by this editorial from the New York Times, an engineered doomsday. This is just one, but as some of you may recall, there was a lot of activity talking about worst-case scenarios where the world might be destroyed.
This was the real intention of Fauci's conference. He was complaining about the media reaction to the H5N1 ferret study. He was concerned not with the possible risk of this kind of experiments, but with the media reaction to them. And he really wanted to silence that.
But I believe the people who feel that they shouldn't be conducted are in the minority. Because even the most concerned members of NSABB felt that the experiments should be done, but the distribution of the knowledge should be restricted.
The distribution of the knowledge should be restricted. In other words, no one should know shit about this. I understand that research is published so that the scientific community can know what's going on and, of course, if you're interested in that line of research, be able to reproduce the results. If we're talking about monster mutant viruses, it makes all the sense in the world to not share the step-by-step instructions to level them up. But what Fauci was talking about was complete obscurity, so no one would know which gain-of-function experiments would be financed, or where, or by whom. That's why he included various examples of the media going on a frenzy about this topic because, you know, creating a potential humanity-killing virus is nothing to worry about. 2 years later, in October 2014, the US government made a full stop in any funding for research of this kind. By the way, do you remember the 600K grant approved for the Wuhan lab? Well, it was conveniently 3 months before this moratorium came into effect. Coincidences, you know. The moratorium was lifted in 2017, so the government financing for gain-of-function research could be resumed. In that same year, the NIH issued a brand new framework for reviewing these funding decisions. But that new framework kept a huge amount of information secret. Everything from who reviews these proposals, what evidence is considered, how competing claims are evaluated, whether there are potential conflicts of interest, or which entities receive funding, there's no disclosure. It became a black box. Everything would happen behind closed doors. The distribution of knowledge was finally restricted. That's how in 2018 the US government quietly green-lighted funding for 2 groups of researchers, one in the United States and the other in the Netherlands, to conduct transmission-enhancing experiments on the bird flu virus, as they were originally proposed before the moratorium. The government confirmed everything only when a reporter learned about them through a whistleblower. Makes you wonder, if there was so much secrecy surrounding this research, and we know it was Fauci's idea to push that secrecy since 2012, how many other gain-of-function studies are being carried as we speak? Tom Inglesby, director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, had already written an opinion on the Washington Post about the dangers of keeping these studies secret. As researchers, we understand the usual logic for keeping scientific grant reviews confidential. But creating potentially pandemic pathogens creates a risk of infecting millions of people with a highly dangerous virus. For this kind of research, there is no justification for keeping risk-benefit deliberations secret. The same secrecy that Fauci wanted. Fauci pushed the gain-of-function research on a really dangerous virus. He created the narrative that the public should not be scared about this kind of experiments, so it's better to keep them secret. Before the moratorium, there were already grants on these experiments, but at least we knew what was going on. Now we are in the dark. Senator Rand Paul mentioned a 2017 publication by Dr. Shenli Shi at the Wuhan Institute, discovery of a rich gene pool of bad SARS-related coronaviruses.
Gain-of-function research was done entirely in the Wuhan Institute by Dr. Shi and was funded by the NIH. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the Wuhan virology paper entitled Discovery of a Rich Gene Pool of Bat SARS-Related Coronaviruses.
Now, Senator Paul's argument is that this study is actually gain-of-function, and Fauci was adamant in his stance that it's not. I found the study and took a good look at it, and some terms just caught my attention, especially the one where it said reverse genetic system. Where have I heard that term before? Well, of course, it was in Fauci's lecture.
Is to actually create gain of function by making mutations, passage adaptation, or other newer genetic techniques such as reverse genetics.
Maybe we are onto something here. So I dug deeper and I found this paper about gain-of-function characteristics, potential risks and benefits of gain-of-function research, summary of a workshop, a summary of a lecture by Dr. Kanta Subbarao, which, for the sake of confirming that she's a fair source, she works with Dr. Fauci at the NIAID. And Subbarao mentions as a clear example of gain-of-function research, reverse genetics, which allow them to produce recombinant viruses. Recombinant viruses can happen in nature when two different strains infect the same cell. They have a one-night stand and produce a baby virus with a blend of the genes of both parents. Essentially, you have a new strain. In this case, we're talking about doing it artificially in a lab, picking specific parts from two or more viruses and building your custom-made, cute Frankenstein baby virus. But reverse genetics which allow them to produce recombinant viruses sounds really similar to the implementation of Dr. Shi's work at the Wuhan Institute, which included testing those recombinant viruses in human cell cultures. And that word, construction, is really hard to misinterpret.
Friday, January 31st, 2020 at 10:32 p.m., Dr. Fauci gets an email from Christian Anderson. Christian Anderson's a British researcher who's received numerous grants from NIH. Two really important sentences are in that email. Two sentences that get Dr. Fauci's attention. The first is this: the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome. So one has to look really closely at all the sequences to see that some of the features look engineered. Again, this is January 31st, 2020. Second sentence: Eddie, Bob, Mike, and myself all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. Email arrives 10:32 to Dr. Fauci on January 31st, 2020. 2 hours later at 12:29 in the morning, Dr. Fauci sends an email to his top deputy, Mr. Hugh Auchincloss. Guys worked for Fauci for 15 years, part of his inner circle. Sends it, subject line says important in all capital letters. He attaches a paper on gain-of-function research written by Dr. Barrick and Dr. Shi. Dr. Shi, of course, is the so-called Bat Lady, Bat Woman, the lady who does research in the Wuhan, China lab. This email, Dr. Fauci says, again, to his top deputy, it is essential that we speak this AM. Keep your cell phone on, read this paper. You will have tasks to do today that must be done. Notice the intensity. Notice the focus. I mean, this is the house is on fire email here. Now, 2 hours after that, at 2:48 in the morning, Dr. Fauci's busy this morning. 12:29, that email he sent to Dr. Auchincloss, his top deputy. 2 hours later at 2:48 in the morning, he sends another email, this one to Robert Kadlec, Assistant HHS Secretary, Trump appointee, not part of his inner circle, and he attaches a different article to this email, one that says the virus came from an animal, that downplays any lab leak theory. Now, again, notice the tone of this one. Bob, this just came out today. Gives a balanced view, best, Tony. I mean, totally different from the previous. This is one like, oh, if you get a chance, read this, gives a balanced view. So the tone is different, but also that sentence, gives a balanced view, it's not true either. That's just not accurate. This article downplays, as I said, the lab leak theory, emphasizes evolutionary cause to the virus. What happens next? What happens next? Later that same morning, Later that same morning at 11:47 a.m., Dr. Fauci's deputy gets back to him. I just want to read you this whole email. The paper you sent me, the one he sent him on that was written by the virologist from Wuhan, China, and Dr. Barrick, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed before the gain-of-function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by NIH. Not sure what that means, since Emily, someone else who works for Dr. Fauci, is sure that no coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework, which of course is the oversight body that's supposed to approve any grant dollars going for gain-of-function research. No coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework. Final sentence, she will try to determine if we have any distant ties to this work abroad. She will try to determine if our fingerprints are on any of this. All these emails happen in 13 hours. So 13 hours after Dr. Fauci gets the initial email from Christian Anderson saying, looks like this virus is engineered, not consistent with evolutionary theory, Dr. Fauci knows some important facts. First, Dr. Fauci knows there's a lethal virus on the loose that started in Wuhan, China. Second, he knows the American taxpayers have funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. Third, he knows that the research grant didn't go through the required oversight board. Fourth, he knows the virus, quote, looks engineered and, quote, not consistent with evolutionary theory. And finally, fifth, Dr. Fauci knows he may have ties to this work in China. His fingerprints, in fact, may be on this. So what does Dr. Fauci do next? After he says, oh, whatever, what does he do next? He organizes a conference call for later that same day. I mean, this is the busiest 24 hours I think I've ever. He organizes a conference call, 12 people on the call. Dr. Fauci and 11 virologists from around the world. Virologists who've gotten millions of American tax dollars over the past several years. Now look at this list. Here's the list of people. There's only 2 Americans on the list, Tony Fauci and one other. Most of them are from around the world, as I said. I think the first thing you notice is who's not on the call. Who's not on the list? Is Dr. Kadlik on the list? The guy he sent the email to at 3 in the morning? Is Dr. Redfield the head of CDC? Dr. Girard, who's with us today, Assistant Secretary at HHS at the time? Dr. Birx, the lady who's soon to be COVID response coordinator? In fact, there's no one from the government on the call except Tony Fauci. Tony Fauci and 11 other individuals who got a bunch of American tax dollars over the years. What happened on the conference call? The short answer is we don't know. We don't know what they talked about. I mean, I think we've got a good idea. We don't know for sure. But we do know what happened 4 days later. 4 days later, February 4th, 2020, Christian Anderson, the guy who started it all, who said the virus looks engineered, Christian Anderson said this 4 days later. Quote, the crackpot theories going around at the moment relate to this virus being somehow engineered. That is demonstrably false, close quote. What? In 4 days, this guy went from this looks engineered to now that's demonstrably false. 4 days, he went from this isn't consistent with evolutionary theory. Now we know it's totally evolutionary. But it gets even better. It gets even better. Mr. Anderson and 3 of the other people on this call write an article a few weeks later that says COVID is not a laboratory construct. And while they're writing that article, there's an email from March 6 where Mr. Anderson offers to let Dr. Fauci edit the article before it's published. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. When the article is published, Dr. Fauci cites it at a White House press conference when he is asked by a reporter about the origin of the virus. Cites the very article he put in motion on the conference call and he was allowed to edit. At the White House, where he's supposed to be giving the American people the truth, he references an article that he manufactured.
Even when I think of gain of function, the idea that mutations would be contrived in order to create new drugs in order to cure potential diseases in the future, because I know how pharmaceutical industries and the agencies that regulate them behave, I feel like this was not an endeavour in order to protect humanity, it was an endeavour in order to generate profit, and it makes me bloody concerned. It makes me concerned that they're doing that. Yeah, but science requires that. All the time we're doing things and splicing things and da-da-da-da. Like, well, that would be great if you were able to remove the profit incentive from any organisation involved in medical health. Another idea, another potential regulation that would change the world. Oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, do you benefit from that? Oh, no. Who do you work for? The FDA. We're the body that regulates it. And who funds you? Oh, is that the time? Oh, there's something coming out of a wet market. Look at that wet market. Oh. Doesn't it trouble you, even a little bit, that the person that's in charge of the solution to this problem was in any way connected to the origins of this problem? Anthony Fauci has repeatedly and deliberately misled Congress and the American people. Resign and face a congressional inquiry, he tweeted. Why did Fauci lie? Why was Fauci compelled to conceal this significant piece of information? I suppose because it's a hugely impactful piece of data to know that the American government and American-funded agencies were involved in the creation of the coronavirus. That this means that we can't trust the government or these government agencies or any narratives that we're given by the government. This truth has to be concealed at all costs because it breaks down our entire trust in the system. So Fauci's denial is just a kind of what you might call a finger in the dam, that everything breaks forth. If this isn't true, if Fauci lied, you have to ask why he lied. He lied because to tell the truth would mean to acknowledge that our systems, our governments, our government agencies are implicitly involved in the creation of this pandemic, a pandemic that they are mandating the solution to, and that the whole cycle has at its head an untrustworthy set of people that are deceiving, which are also called liars.